or if you're wanting to stay at home and out of the nursing home, and how to pay for that, how to make that happen. And before I go on, I want to ask a little bit. I always want to be sure that everybody can see the slides and hear me all right. And if you would, there's a chat box. Just type Y for yes and N for no. So Y for yes and N for no. And Emily, you can let me know, are you getting some positives responses?
Yes, lots of Ys. I think we're good.
Okay, great. So when I have a meeting with a family, a lot of times what we typically will go through healthcare issues, and then we'll talk about financial issues. But then I want to, based on that information, I ask them, if in the ideal world, what would it be that you would want to happen? What is it? What all would you like for me to help you with? And so I call it the magic wand. If you could wave a magic wand, what would be your goals? And it's kind of interesting to me because they may come in for one specific reason, but after we've talked, the goals really expand and become maybe more long-term. And so what I hear is I would like to stay at home, or I'd like to keep my loved one at home. I would like to be able to pay for care, but I don't want to lose the farm or my business or my income or whatever. I want to protect my spouse. I want to leave something for my children or protect my children. And then the other thing, and I hear this a lot from husband and wives, I want to know that my spouse will be protected even if I have to go on Medicaid. So we've had, as you can imagine, through the years, a lot of clients that have come to us. Our practice is really devoted to people with chronic care issues, or people who are concerned about developing chronic care problems later on. This is Sherry came to us, still hear from Sherry all the time. Her husband's now deceased, but when she came to us, she was really overwhelmed by the fact that her husband had Parkinson's, and she just really didn't know what the next step was. So was very encouraged to put him into a nursing home. And so we worked with Sherry and to try to keep her husband at home as long as possible, but wanted to be sure that Sherry was safe. And so this is her comments about her situation. My husband has Parkinson's. You helped me keep him at home as long as possible. You showed me how to be a better caregiver. I could not have figured out how to pay for care with Medicare and Medicaid on my own. And so she goes on to say, I highly recommend Clinkscales Elder Law Practice. But the bottom line here for us was that we were able to preserve Sherry's resources for her, yet be sure that her husband got good care, and that she wasn't devastated financially or emotionally because her husband had Parkinson's. Who am I? And some of you know me, but let me give you a little bit of background. I'm an attorney in Hays, Kansas, and Wichita, Kansas. I'm an elder care attorney. What that means is that I focus on elder care issues, aging and chronic care issues. I focus on protecting assets from long-term care. I've been practicing for over 40 years, but the last 16, actually 17 years now, have been focused on elder care. And I'll get into why I do that here in a moment. I just like to share this with you. This is my family. It's my wife and 40 years, and my 3 sons, my daughter-in-law, and my 2 grandsons. One of my sons lives in Wichita. In fact, my son and my daughter-in-law with my 2 grandkids live in Wichita. And so that's a little bit of my connection and why I'm like having an office in Wichita. It gives me a good excuse to go down there. So why am I passionate about this? And I really am passionate about this. And I want to share my journey with you for a moment, and maybe take you back just a little bit. That's my grandmother got sick. My mom was going to take care of her. My mom was actually already living with my grandmother. And then my mom died unexpectedly about 20 years ago. And so I began a journey taking care of my grandmother. I was a lawyer at that time, but what I became quickly overwhelmed by all the issues that my grandmother was throwing at me because they weren't really legal issues in my mind. And what I discovered was that when I sought help, she was living in Fort Worth. When I sought help from attorneys down there or for healthcare agent or different healthcare agencies, I really could not get a clear picture about what needed to be done. So I changed my practice actually in response to trying to take care of my grandmother. And this is what I learned from her. What was important to her was that she wanted to stay independent. She wanted to stay out of the nursing home as long as possible. She wanted to preserve her assets for the sole reason to take care of herself, to live the lifestyle that she wanted. But what I also discovered that I, as a caregiver, could certainly get overwhelmed with all the decisions that needed to be made. And not only decisions, but it's kind of the old thing about not knowing what I don't know. And so I realized that if I wanted to help people like my grandmother, I had to expand what I did to focus on my grandmother, to focus on people that are dealing with chronic illnesses. I learned that I had to have a plan, but I had to have a guide because the plan is ever changing. I used to kid my grandmother. I took care of her for 10 years. I kidded my grandmother that every year she changed the plan. And what I mean by that is that there was a point after about 6 years where she had been on hospice twice, and I thought we were at the end. I ended up moving her to an assisted living facility, and she rallied. And she did really, really well there. And I'm not advertising assisted living. I'm just talking about getting good care. So the journey can be complicated and ever changing, but I knew that I needed a guide. And so I had an attorney in my office help me. I had what we call a care coordinator at that time, was an RN named Marie Leiker that worked for me, that was guiding me through the process and journey with my grandmother. Similarly, when the Woods family came to see me, this was actually a father and son. His wife was sick and needed nursing home care. They had been told that they were going to have to sell the farm and basically impoverish themselves. And we were able to show them there are some alternatives to paying for care. So when the quote from Mr. Woods was, when my wife got sick and needed the nursing home, I was told I would have to sell my home and my farm I thought I would go broke. Randy saved my farm for me and my children. Mrs. Woods and eventually Mr. Woods passed away, and now we're actually working with their son, who is luckily, because of our efforts, it still has the farm and did not have to sell it because of the illness of his mom. So long-term chronic illness does not have to devastate your finances or your family. I think one of the things that we give some relief to the families is that we can get that burden of payment off their shoulders so they can focus more on their loved ones. So today you're going to discover how to plan for long-term care costs, how to pay for long-term care, and how to stay at home. So we're talking about how to plan for long-term care costs. What we're going to give you some examples of that sometimes planning, proper planning will avoid a crisis. And it allows you to protect with proper planning what's most important, and you're in control. In this case, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, 65 and 62, did some pre-planning. They had 480 acres. Their goal was, we really want to protect the farm. They knew that long-term care costs were $7,000 to $10,000 a month. The farm had been in the family for generations. And so what we did in that case was that we actually preserved their assets by putting them into a special type of long-term trust, an irrevocable trust. And as long as they did not apply for Medicaid for 5 years, everything inside that trust was protected. And so their comment was the investment was well worth protecting our assets from care cost of $7,000 a month. Let me fast forward it for a moment, because I had another family that I met with yesterday, and we've been working with them probably 8 years or so. And in that case, we were able to put their farm ground and some other resources into a special type of trust. We had some long-term care insurance and so forth. I met with the wife yesterday and her son, and at this point, the husband has dementia. He's also had some mini strokes, and he's transitioned into a assisted living. We're going to try that for a while. We're hoping that we can get him strong enough to come home. But the point is that when I met with her yesterday, met with the wife, the issue was about how to get him better. The issue was about health. It was not about assets, because we had already protected all those assets, and we already had a plan in place to pay for his care, so that they would not lose the farm and she would not be financially devastated. So here's another one where we did some pre-planning. The Schmidts had some IRAs. They had some investments. They were really concerned about, they wanted to protect each other. And if one of them got sick, they did not want the well spouse to be devastated or impoverished. And they also wanted to leave some money to their grandchildren. So this is a little bit of a unique case, but there's a Pension Protection Act that authorized us to show them that created some planning opportunities. And in this particular case, we took $150,000. Now, I don't if it's either out of Mr. Schmidt's IRA or Mrs. Schmidt's IRA, don't remember, and bought a $250,000 whole life, $250,000 single premium life insurance policy. And it had a $7,000 a month long-term care rider for up to 5 years. The nice thing about this was that the purchase of the policy did not cause a taxable occurrence. In addition, the long-term care policy, when it pays out, it will be tax-free versus spending $150,000 of IRA money, which would all be taxable. And in addition, if they did have a claim on the insurance for long-term care, that claim would only reduce the death benefit. And so they would get, upon their death, on the second of them to die, their family would get the remainder of the life insurance policy. What was interesting about this, and this is not unusual, actually their children had made the appointment. Their children just wanted them to have some kind of plan in place so that they as children weren't going to inherit a mess. So if we're talking about pre-planning, if you want to talk about that, what we would do is schedule a strategy session with you and explore what options are available. We want to get some essential documents, really strong essential documents in place. We want to start implementing a strategy right away to avoid roadblocks or changes later on. And again, the more in advance we can work, like the family I talked about from yesterday, because we'd worked years ago, the process of aging in that case in preserving assets has become so much easier for that family. So how do you pay for long-term care? Well, first of all, you need to make the decision on how you're going to pay. Is it long-term care insurance? Is it cash? Is it some property to be sold? But the point is that you ought to make the decision and not some court, or not put your family in a bind so that they're having to do things that may not be what you want. But you also need to understand that if we do it properly, you don't have to go broke just because you need long-term care. And we're going to talk about how you can use Medicare or VA or Medicaid to pay for long-term care. Let me just touch on that real quick. Medicare is a insurance program, basically, that people 65 and above are entitled to. There's some enrollment and that sort of thing requirements. There's a way you can get on Medicare under 65, but that's not the purpose of our conversation today. The VA is a program, there's something called a VA pension that can provide tax-free benefits for people who served in the military during a wartime. Does not mean they have to serve in a war, but they served during a wartime. It's a tax-free benefit. It is asset and income sensitive. So if you have too many assets or too much income, you may not get the whole benefit or any of it. And then the third one is Medicaid. And Medicaid is a program that you have to qualify for. And there are certain restrictions on what kind of assets that you can have. And the process of Medicaid can be complicated, yet it can also be very rewarding in terms of being able to protect a spouse and income and the like. So Here's one where we actually really were focused on using Medicare and long-term care insurance. And so in this particular case, Mr. Johnson had a stroke and was in the hospital, and Mrs. Johnson came to see us. He was about to be discharged, and they were going to discharge him to a nursing home. He had some long-term care insurance, and the reason they were going to discharge him to a nursing home is because it's in a small community, and that community did not have a skilled care facility. And the mom wanted, Mrs. Johnson wanted to keep him around. Well, we talked to her and showed her that actually, if we could discharge him to a Medicare skilled facility, then several things would happen. First of all, Medicare would pay for his time there. Secondly, and most importantly to me, he would be getting skilled care that would greatly improve the chances that he would get better and stronger versus setting in a nursing home without skilled care. And third, that we could actually tap into the long-term care policy to make some home improvements. And if we needed home care, it would help pay for that. So as a result of that, because of Mrs. Johnson's early involvement, we did get Mr. Johnson discharged to a skilled facility. He did get better, and he was able to come home. So we got Medicare benefits extended. We got the health improvement that Mr. Johnson needed. He was able to return home because he improved. And the long-term care policy was extended because we weren't using the full benefit, we're just using part of it, but we were protecting assets in the process. So here's another one, a plan using Medicaid. So in this particular case, and I wish this was an aberration, but it is a common case. So Mr. Reed has cancer. You can pick whatever disease that you want to pick out, but in this particular case, he has cancer. He had been discharged to a nursing home and was paying $8,000 a month. Mrs. Reed had $80,000 in her IRA, her home, and a joint account of $60,000. And she was fairly young, in my office, 70s young, but she was fairly young. So the rest of her life, she had an IRA to live on and up to $60,000. And she was told by the nursing home she would need to spend down all of her resources before Medicaid would help. And then Medicaid would put a lien on her home. And she was worried about not getting good care, that her husband was not going to get good care. So just several things happened here. And in this particular case, we got Mr. Reed on Medicaid. And Mrs. Reed was able to keep all of the assets, her IRA and all the $60,000. We set it up so that no lien could be placed on the home during Mrs. Reed's lifetime. I also want to point out that if Mr. Reed was a wartime veteran, we could have got VA benefits for him up to $2,200 a month. And that could some of that could even flow to Mrs. Reed. He wasn't in this particular case, but I did want to touch on that. And a lot of times we use the VA benefits, called VA pension, to help pay for home care if a person goes home. So like in our previous slide, Mr. Johnson, if they got down to a certain asset level, we would have been able to tap into VA. So what do you need to do if you're trying to pay for care? is schedule a strategy session as soon as possible. Explore all funding sources that may be out there. And it could be your funds, your funding sources. It could be community funding sources. It could be government funding sources. There's a lot of things that we would want to explore. We want to be sure that we get in place very strong powers of attorney in other estate planning documents. And the reason that I say that is that if a person comes in here with a crappy power of attorney and they've lost capacity, many times my ability to help that family is confined by that power of attorney. Though we can go get a guardian conservatorship, our hands are much more tied versus if we have a very strong, broad power of attorney. But again, our goal is that we want to find, get, and pay for good care without going broke. I want to share with you Pat's story, and I don't know if you've listened to this series that we've had here. This is the third in our series of talks about aging issues. But let me talk about Pat for a moment, and I think there's a special part of Pat in me. Pat came to us at a time in a real crisis. She and her husband had moved to Kansas to be near family because he really needed care and she couldn't do it by herself. The care got worse and worse. I'm sorry, his health got worse and worse. Pat came to see us. She was angry. She was bitter. She was frustrated about, the cards that had been dealt her. The cards had been dealt her husband. She wasn't mad at her husband. She was, she was excited about the twilight years, and then the tide changed. We worked with Pat and got it so that her husband was put into a nursing home. We made sure he got good care. We protected income and resources for Pat. And in the end, Pat ended up being one of our strongest advocates for our services. And I like this quote, particularly the very last line. My husband needed nursing home care. You guided me through the process. Your care coordinators made sure my husband was getting good care. I highly recommend you because you are always there for your clients and will guide them through everything that goes on. Things we never expected to go through. And I think that's where I identify so strongly with Pat. I think when I was working with my grandmother, I was going through things I just never thought I would have to go through. I just thought I was way too young to be taking care of my grandmother. But it was my job, and it's a job that I appreciated the opportunity to help her with. So I want to talk about my grandmother a little bit more because of our journey together and trying to keep her at home. It was her most important goal. I had to convince my grandmother it's not about your home versus a nursing home. There's a lot of things in between. Some of it she cooperated with, some of it she didn't. But support for the caregiver, and when I mean support in tools and guidance, is really important. So again, let me kind of go through a little bit what I told you at the beginning. My mom was taking care of my grandmother. They lived in Fort Worth. One morning, my mom just didn't wake up. And so all of a sudden, I was taking care of my 86-year-old grandmother. after my mom died, my grandmother's health deteriorated quite rapidly, large part because of depression, giving up and the like. She went on hospice twice. And again, I was kind of working with the hospice people to keep her on hospice and so forth. Eventually, her resources were down to about $60,000 in her home. But my grandmother's goal was to live independently and alone. And I use this quote a lot. Honey, this is what she said to me. Honey, I know someday I will have to go to the nursing home. I just don't want to know about it. And what she meant was that as long as she was cognitive, she was willing to take risks. And I think I've kind of phrased it in my experience with her, the dignity of risk. And I wanted to give her, if I respected her dignity, I was going to let her take some risks. So along the way, and again, I want you to know, this is about 4 years into caring for my grandmothers when I actually changed my practice. So the first 6 years of that period, so 4 years before I changed my practice and 2 years after that, I was able to keep her in her home. She was not always cooperative, and I don't mean that mean. I would bring in, as an example, someone to help her bathe, and she would meet them at the door and give them cookies and coffee and have a nice visit and send them on their way. Again, as I said, she went on hospice twice. The last time, which was 6 years into it, the hospice nurse called me and said, she has to go into a nursing home. So I went down and picked up my grandmother, and again, she gave me the whole thing about not going to a nursing home. And so I moved her into an assisted living, and hey, I found one assisted living facility that would take my grandmother on hospice, given her limitations. And so guess what happened? She wasn't happy there at the beginning, and then she got more and more happy. We went from, our care coordinator got involved. We went from 14 medications to 4 medications. And my grandmother brightened up and she became social again. And she was out eating in the dining room with the other residents there. And then she stayed there for 4 more years. The last 50 days of her life, she was in a nursing home, and she died at 96. So the lessons from my grandmother were that with proper guidance, you can stay at home much longer. And not only guidance, but tools and resources. The transition can be gradual. It doesn't have to be the home or the nursing home. There are a lot of things in between. But support for the caregiver is critical. Guidance for the caregiver is critical. Tools for the caregiver is critical. And that with proper planning, the resources and management, resources can be stretched to achieve the goals of staying at home. One time before I got into what we call life care planning, I saw people go from their home to the nursing home because they couldn't afford to stay in their home. If they'd had enough money, they could have stayed in their home. And I thought, what a sad commentary that we had this huge gap where with a little bit of resources, they could have stayed at home, not been on Medicaid or not be on full Medicaid. So what do you need to do if you're wanting to stay at home, if you're facing aging or chronic illness issues? Meet with us for a strategy session. Don't wait. The longer you wait, the greater the crisis and the more limited the options. No matter where you are in the process. Somebody asked me yesterday, when is it too late to plan? Don't give up. it's really, it's never too late. There are solutions, and we can walk you through those solutions. So let me share JB. And again, this is kind of another one of my favorite families that I worked with. And I think the reason that I liked JB is that it took a lot for him to come ask us for help. He and his wife had always been independent. It was a big deal for him to take a moment and be willing to open his life to us, but he did. A very quiet, stoic individual. But we were able to help him through a difficult process with his wife, all the way her journey from home to different types of care, levels of care, eventually to a nursing home, and eventually to her passing. When at the end of the matter, at the end of the case, JB wrote this note. I felt very comfortable with everyone I worked with. Clinkscales helped us through some very hard years. And that's for JB, that's quite a compliment. So far you've discovered there are ways to plan for possible long-term care costs. And such plan will protect your spouse, your family, and your assets. You can pay for long-term care with private resources, or if necessary, you can access government programs, but you don't have to go broke in the process. With proper care and planning, you can delay or avoid the nursing home, allowing you to stay at home longer. And I really hope that you get that last point. And so when I say this, that with proper planning, with an expert, it really does improve your ability to stay at home, to be sure you protect your family, and to preserve your assets from the devastation of long-term care costs. I'm an example. Again, taking care of my grandmother. I had some great advisors in my office that helped me through that process. And it let me go from being a full-time manager of my grandmother to being a grandson again. And I think that's important to understand that can happen. So how do you make it happen? We're going to schedule a strategy session with you for avoiding, planning, and paying for long-term care. And so how does that work? We're going to, actually what will happen, we're going to give you a number to call, and we're going to send you an email. Then somebody from my office is going to reach out and visit with you to be sure we can help you. And if we can, we're going to then schedule a 60 to 90-minute meeting in person or by Zoom or by telephone with me or my law partner, Jenny Walters, or Adam Deese. And at that meeting, then we're going to discuss your financial and legal needs should you require outside care, or if you develop a chronic illness or dementia. We're going to review your current plan and how does that fit with what you want to have happen. We're going to establish some long-term goals. And if you're dealing with a chronic illness or aging issue, we want to develop a plan to keep you safe and in the least restrictive environment. Plus, I'll answer all of your questions you have about your unique situation. At the end of the time, you'll have an analysis of your plan. You'll have better clarity of the issues and goals. And I want to emphasize that many times in that meeting, people's goals expand based on the conversation. You'll have a blueprint on how to achieve those goals, and we'll give you an exact amount of what the investment will be to get all of that done. So then what happens? After that meeting, you'll decide to get started. We'll start drafting the plan and the documents related to that. We'll schedule our next meeting for planning purposes. We will prepare the necessary documents to be signed by you at another meeting. We'll work together on tools and other steps that we need to make to implement the plan. And if you're dealing with a chronic illness or aging issues that require assistance, we would like for you to meet with one of our care coordinators. And again, I think the idea here is that I want you to understand it's not just about documents. It's about having a plan and what all needs to go into that plan to make it work. So typically the meeting would be $450, but because you've participated today, the strategy session is going to be free. So what's the catch? We've got 8 spots available. I think we're down to about 6, but we'll find 8 spots available in the next 3 weeks to get you to have your strategy session. To do so, call this number 877-325-8040 or click on the Survey Monkey link that we're going to send you, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. So my guarantee is that if you have the strategy session, you're going to know more after it's over than you do right now. You'll have an analysis of what happens if you do nothing. And your time's not going to be wasted. And so to book the strategy session, call this number 877-325-8040, or you'll see on the right-hand side here, this is the email that Emily is going to be mailing out to you. And you just click on the Survey Monkey link, and it'll give you how to get us your information, and then we'll start the process of calling you right away, then setting up a telephone call with our intake person, and then getting you on the calendar. And because you're doing this, we're going to give you a copy of a book in which I wrote a chapter on protecting your family. Don't write a blank check to the nursing home. And I'll give you a written summary of my recommendations. Again, here's the number again, 877-325-8040. And then you'll get the free strategy session, an analysis of your current plan, a free written report to achieve your goals, and then the free book, Protect Your Family. So Emily, I'm going to turn this back over to you. I don't know if there's any questions or not.
Yes, there is one question here about how often are we at our Wichita location. Randy, do you want to go ahead and talk about that a little bit? Also, our good news about our new Wichita location.
Yeah, we're just moving into a new permanent office in Wichita. We had been in an office sharing arrangement. We have a staff member in Wichita. She's there. She's one of our care coordinators, so she's basically in the field except for appointments. And so we're hoping to have that fully going by May 1st, which is, I know, just a few days away. So if we had an appointment, she would actually man that appointment. Either we would have an attorney come down, or we would set up a Zoom meeting with, her name is Kayla and the client for those meetings. So it either be in person with Kayla or in person with Kayla and an attorney.
Correct. All right, thank you for addressing that, Randy. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions in the chat box at this moment, but please do go ahead and feel free, if you have any questions, to go ahead and put those in there as we're kind of wrapping up our presentation this morning. I do want to just kindly remind everyone that you will receive that follow-up email that Randy mentioned that will contain those two important things. That email will include a recording of the session. We provide that to you so you can share this with other family members or friends that weren't able to make this session today, or so you can just go back through and take notes on all the important topics that Randy covered this morning. The second thing that that email contains is that SurveyMonkey link. I'm also going to go ahead and put that in the chat box right now. Okay, there you go. It's in the chat box now, so feel free to just click it and get it filled out right now to reserve your spot. So like we mentioned, if you fill out that quick 2-minute survey, you'll receive the completely free strategy session where you can speak with one of our attorneys about your specifically unique situation, because they all are very unique. On that same survey link, as Randy mentioned, you can request our free book, Protect Your Family, Don't Go Broke Paying for the Nursing Home. Lots of great tips and tricks and additional resources that might be helpful for you, your journey. So I want to go ahead and reiterate that you can call our office. That's there, that number is there on your screen. If you have any questions regarding that free strategy book or just any other additional questions, we're always happy to chat with you. I would also like to invite you all to stay up to date on our upcoming events. That's on our website, elderlawkansas.com/events. And I'm going to go ahead and also put that in the chat box here. That way you can click on that link, you can sign up for our additional upcoming workshops because we have a ton coming up this summer. Lots of great information, don't want you to miss out there. Randy, last question come in. Can you cover this? Do you also do wills?
We do. We do wills and trust and the typical estate planning type documents. Again, we may talk with you at a little bit of a higher level, if you will, versus, again, I used to kid my clients that my will that I did for them will work if they'll just die. But we're probably going to talk a little bit more extensively about what happens if you live a long time. But a will is certainly an important part of the tools to have as part of your planning. So yes, we do wills and trusts, yes.
Randy, last question here. What could we do to help someone who is single, has limited access, and no children?
So a lot of times, and we have quite a few like that, that's not unusual. A lot of times our struggle is finding someone that can be their agent, someone that can act for them if they lose capacity. And I will tell you that, you know, we've used a neighbor, we've used church members, we've used a pastor in a couple cases. Sometimes we use somebody from my office that can be their agent. But I think that a lot of times for a single individual, that our planning is probably most important for them, because if we don't do some type of planning, then a court's going to. And there's no natural guardian, there's no that sort of thing. So, you know, in a way, and excuse the saying, but we call a lot of those people orphaned elders. And so again, I think that many times that may be our most important type of work, is working with folks like that, because they don't know where to turn. So there are a lot of things that we can do for those folks as well.
Great answer. Thank you for covering that for us this morning. It looks like that's all the questions that we have right now. So thank you, everyone. Please fill out that SurveyMonkey. Let us know how we did. Let us know how we can help you. And we can't wait to work with you. Thank you for your time this morning, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, everyone.